Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this live stream with Lenny from After Later Audio. You may have seen the demo for the 3 new modules we'll be framing this conversation around. You may not. We'll play some and certainly link that as we go. You may have also seen my video where we were against this rather nice image, some of my greatest thumbnail work so far, I believe. I look quite good as a cat. But without further ado, let's introduce Lenny. How's it going?
Hey, great, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
So I will just quickly address the live chat, if I can find that window. I'm currently staring at several different screens. If people in the chat can let us know if audio's fine, if levels are good, if someone needs to come up or down in level, or something I'm playing back is too loud or quiet, scream at me in the chat. Keyboard warrior away, and I'll do my best to adjust as we go. Hello to everyone. Too many to go through name by name, but nice to see some people already checking out some of the clouds variants that you offer and the new modules. That's come up a few times in the chat already. For people that maybe this is the first time they've maybe seen something with you, Lenny, or After Later Audio in general, can you give us just a super quick rundown of company history, and I'll link out to more kind of in-depth interview content while you do that.
Yeah, sure. So I started back into this music space about 2 years ago, and started into the Eurorack space in the DIY area. So started building all kinds of different kits and DIY items, and then essentially, drawing on the electrical engineering background, which I had gone for school for, started continuing to tinker and then started eventually into my own designs. And now culminating in these most recent, we released 3 prior, which I think was back in November, roughly. And then these latest 3 modules in what we're calling the heritage line, just kind of, staying true to the basics of synthesis and introducing those back here just last week.
I'd like to I'll pull the browser up and take a look at those right there as well on the image scrolling around the heritage line. Now these are your kind of classic analog synth kind of building blocks with an oscillator and a filter and an envelope. I'm going to start with Bosk, and again, maybe quite quickly because there's some new modules we'd like to talk about as well.
Yeah, sure.
But this is this Curtis SEM-based chip in SH101s, Profits, Memory Mogs, as it says. Classic kind of feature-rich, really, for a basic oscillator, if you like. It's not a complex oscillator, it's not a dual oscillator, but just got that kind of classic, great vintage mono synth vibe. This must play into your heritage. You used to play, was it more kind of Chicago house acid?
yeah. So that was the previous tour in the music space, both as doing house music production as well as playing vinyl back when we used to play vinyl as a DJ. Really my entire set was based on 101, 303, 909, playing those. So when I saw that these were chips were being remade and broadly available, didn't have to worry about running into supply issues next week, was certainly intrigued to start there. Absolutely. And it also just enables a really compact, simple design because there's so much built into the chip. So then really all you're doing is, maximizing what's been exposed on the chip and making that available for everybody. So we can get a nice, like you said, feature-rich, super dense module. Yet still playable, right? Still you can get your fingers in and touch and move everything.
Yeah. As you say, everything you'd kind of want from an oscillator. Now, the Filthy, which is up on the screen at the moment, something that jumps out to me is that they're really well priced. But I wouldn't say they were cheap. And I don't know, that's a word that I'm certainly guilty, not necessarily with After Later, but generally talking about products in general. I've certainly said, oh, this is really cheap. And I never mean it with the negative connotations that are sometimes associated with that. You think cheap, you maybe think bad build, corners have been cut. Absolutely not with these modules, right from earlier prototypes that I tried last year of these.
Yeah.
The mini pots feel great. They're not wobbly, which is something I can't say for everything that's above this price. Everything feels solid, even though $99 for a filter, and it's built really well. Sounds good.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that, Ben. And I will say that on the pot thing, the trimmers, the plastic handles, I've always found it weird that these tall bushing potentiometers that we use them in all of our builds, because they really do they're just much more sturdy and stable. And I really think I hope it breaks the stigma for folks that have typically tried to stay away from those trimmer style pots, but it does give a nice sturdy feel. I actually like them better than using the micro knobs on a metal shaft, because those micro knobs don't have a texture on them, and so the fingers can slip on them. And I actually really prefer the feel of those plastic trimmers with the tall bushing again.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. But again, it's a multi-mode filter. It's not just a low pass or just a band or a high. A couple of inputs on this version of Filthy as well. Volt-proactive tracking, a attenuverter on the cutoff, attenuation on the res, 2 FM inputs. It's packing things in without being kind of too tightly spaced. And these being the first modules I saw from your original designs, but as they are, these first 3 heritage modules, that really kind of struck home for me as I started playing around with them. The third one, just to make sure we, of course, show them all. Envy, ADSR envelope. Yeah. But again, there's retrig on there, which we don't always see. End of attack, end of release, CV over every stage. The threshold for the end of outputs is variable as well. It's just nicely packed in and feels well built. And $99 for a nicely done module. Really reasonably priced, as I said. Really good. So is this, the envelopes and the filter, what's their heritage as well? I'm aware of the oscillator and SEM oscillators and some of the synths that those are in. I didn't realise that the envelopes as well were from the Pro 1, the Prophet, the Memory Moog.
Yeah. So there again, it was a whole series of chips, which actually continued to mature beyond even the 3340 that we use in the Bosk. There's the 3345, which I recall has a couple of extra pins on it. I'm forgetting the added benefits off the top of my head, but the 3340 being the kind of legendary one, which is where I wanted to go there. But then also the filter is the same, so it essentially integrates the OTA capabilities that you need to drive from a filter perspective into an entire filter chip, where essentially you can effectively pick the frequencies and pick the routing between the various stages of the filter, which just again makes for a super dense and enables this kind of highly packed functionality here. And then the envelope's same way, where it exposes all of these. Essentially, everything that you're seeing there is a pin on the chip that we can expose, except for the end of rise and end of attack. That actually came from a chat with somebody that just mentioned how important those were to him in one of the modules that he had, and I started playing with that module and agreed with him, and so we just went ahead and added them here. It's just to kind of fill out and get that nine jacks, which is kind of the perfect balance as far as I'm concerned on these 6 HP modules.
It's nice that the end of outputs are there, because that really feeds through nicely into the kind of end of an activity output, say on steps, which is one of the new modules that we'll look at. I like this idea then of creating these chains. I strike my envelope, and as the envelope finishes, a little random flourish goes off, or the last step in a flourish turns an envelope on or off, and this then creating these kind of feedback chain reactions, whether they eventually all tie back round to each other or don't. It's kind of one long chain of a few modules that does eventually stop and give a kind of musical pause. And that's really interesting way to work. Where did these 3 new modules come from? Because these have all this classic lineage, all the classic synths that these things have been in, with all the features kind of broken out, really well priced, 6 HP. The 3 new modules are certainly very well priced as well, also 6 HP. But they've moved away from that kind of classic synth history, if you like.
Sure.
So where did they come from?
It came from me kind of stepping back and looking at the 3 modules and trying to assess what the next right steps would be to continue to build out a full voice. So without wanting to go kind of full sequencer, I wanted to offer some type of stepped CV option to be able to drive the oscillator, as well as having then some basic modulation source that you get out of a mass or the universal slope generator, the kind of standard old school slope generator, and then the final one with blend. Really what I needed when I started with that is I thought of it as a VCA, because I needed something to really kind of complete the end-to-end voice, and then quickly realized that I could make it both a CV and audio blend of various functionality there, and make that available. So then you could have again, a really nice and dense set of modules that form a complete voice, but yet you can do a lot of rich things with them. With tilt and step certainly go beyond just kind of the standard slope generator and step CV generator.
Mm-hmm. So I've just had the image of the modules on screen. I'll play the first 40 to 50 seconds of the demo, the first demo I've made. And I've got the live chat up, the reason being just to distract myself. Get questions coming in the live chat. We're watching the live chat. If they're relevant, I'll throw the question straight in. If it's not relevant right at that time, I'll pull it into my notes, and we'll keep coming back and doing kind of Q&A as we go. So do keep them coming. But I just wanted to say that the first video that I've done is all 3 modules at once. A little bit of using them together, but also a little bit of a demo of each, because they're very feature rich. As I've been sharing these modules, and again, I'll pull the image up. It's certainly nicer than my face. A little bit prettier to look at. I've been kind of saying that these cover most modular functions. Nearly everything is covered in blend, steps, and tilt. Very modular modules, I would say, in that they're kind of patch programmable, which lends itself back to the history of Surge. Very modular modules. So the first video goes through these 3 modules collectively. Every couple of weeks from now, effectively, we're going to make a demo for each one. So there'll be a really in-depth blend video, a really in-depth steps video, a really in-depth tilt video. And the reason for doing that and spreading them out is they all deserve their own space. Each module definitely deserves its own super kind of focus. But also it means you can get involved. If you have any comments here, or you want to go comment on that video, I'll put the link in the chat in a moment. I can include your suggestions with credit where appropriate, of course, but if there's a question you have, or, hey, I've always wondered how function generators do X. I don't know how to do that on the function generators I have. Can you show me how that works with tilt? I can put that in the tilt video. Likewise for steps, if there's a question of, I don't really get what the end of a burst out would do, or how could I use random with module X, Y, or Z, I may be able to get that in the video. So just a thing to say, keep comments and questions coming, and it can certainly inform the videos that I make. But for 40 or 50 seconds, let's just check out a snippet of them in action from the demo. Hello, and welcome to this video on and tilt. Let's check out what's to come before we get into it. So there they are in action.
I can talk about.
So that's the video done. There they are in action. If there's any questions that raises immediately, we can certainly answer them here. We're just here for the kind of casual hangout of a live stream. Of course, if you're watching this back after the live stream, you can leave comments on this one, or you can go comment on the video, which will be linked in the description too. One question we did have, just to ring back to the Bosk, Chris Walker asked, can someone explain the magic of the CEM-SEM VCOs? What makes them so nice? Is there an easy answer to that? I don't know.
Yeah, and you get all the transistor matching that you need, as well as you get all the temperature compensation all handled within a chip, and you're getting saw, pulse, and triangle outputs. So essentially, you provide power and some wrapping around the tuning, and a good quality capacitor for it, and you've got an oscillator, an oscillator that tracks really well over 5+ octaves. It can be tuned to do even more than that, but for general music synthesis, that's considered good enough.
Effects Music asked, are these only available from the Afterlater website, or is there a distributor in the EU or UK, for example?
Yeah, so Signal Sounds should have Bosk in stock now.
Okay, I will find that link for you, Effects, and I'll drop that in.
Yeah, Signal Sound should have it on the EU. Found Sound should have it in Australia, I believe. And then in the US, you've got our website. Then you also have Perfect Circuit and Patchworks as well.
There is a retailers tab on the website, I've noticed as well, if you want to kind of break out and find them in your area. And that's a range of everything you do that's out there, right? There's clouds variants, various bits of replicas, the new stuff. Most of that's kind of spread around the world now, I think, right?
Yeah, I think you'll find a pretty good selection at all those retailers. I mean, they're not going to be stocking everything, but there's certainly a good cross section of the modules that we offer.
Yeah. And I would say, I've said this several times, whether it's Afterlater Audio or any company, if there's a store that you like, that's local to you, that you use, that's been supportive and good for you, that don't have what you want, certainly just reach out. Most of the shops and their owners, I would say, are kind of just as cool as, people making content or the manufacturers or the artists. I think the stores are very much an important part of the scene and ran by very similarly minded, kind of nice modular people, as I like to say. Everyone's just super friendly. And my partner's always amazed at how nice everyone is. So the reason I say that is to just let them know what you want. It's really good for stores to hear, hey, I'd love for you to have this in stock. They then know that they'll sell some, they're going to get some in, it supports everybody, that kind of circle goes round and round to everybody's benefit. Another question, sub FUSC, I'm not quite sure how that's pronounced. What do you mean by surge-like? Is that just in the way that they can be patched? And great vids as usual. Thanks for the compliment on that one. I'll pull the image up. And what I meant specifically by surge-like was when I said patch programmable. Now, modern digital modules may have a screen where a menu and a firmware or software system selects different functions, and maybe the functions of inputs and outputs change based on that menu system. A very simple, just say Moog style low pass filter, you can't really patch program. It doesn't do much other than be a filter. It may self-oscillate and be a sine wave, but it's not kind of patch programmed. Now, if we look at tilt, which is the right-hand module there, it can be an envelope, an LFO, an oscillator, a slew limiter, lots of things. With the rise and fall outputs, it can be a gate delay by simply gating this like an envelope and then having a longer rise, which is effectively delay time, and then when it lands into its fall stage, the fall output becomes active, and therefore you get a gate delay, with rise time being delay time. And the idea of patch programmability comes from Serge's work with the positive and negative slews, which led into the DUSG, the kind of classic dual universal slope generator, with the idea that a voltage goes up and it comes down. Maybe it holds at the top as well. And tilt, it very much kind of pays heritage to that being a function generator. How you patch it kind of programs what the output is. And that's a very Serge-like kind of philosophy in patching. If it's oscillating, for example, you can still plug an audio input in. You can use it as a kind of crude audio filter, which also works like a slew for sub-audio. Hopefully the video demo that I've done highlights a handful of things, but I'll certainly delve into that with a tilt demo. Maybe that's a good section for the demo. What is patch programmability? maybe a mini history lesson in a probably already too long demo that I'm going to make. I maybe need a kind of surge in the history of patch programmability video or something like that. But yeah, by surge like, that's what I mean. It's not a particular clone of anything surge like. It's not a model of, you know, one of their filters or anything like that. Gotta love modular, people. Yes, absolutely. So again, just to get it out there for people, fire questions at us. I'm pulling them out. What I wanted to ask was, with blends, which is the left-hand one on screen for people looking, the actual blend, so you say VCAs came first, but you could use this like a pair of VCAs and a whole separate CV utility, right?
Yeah, exactly. The thought was being there that really the volume control was really nothing more than a CV attenuator. So that's where then that added on, and then realizing that I was going to have a bunch of CVNs that, yeah, I could essentially give all kinds of CV processing capabilities there with the min-max comparator sum outputs there on blend to really, again, make a nice dense, make it a good companion for tilt because of the VCA capability, as well as the extra kind of CV processing that you can get. But again, keeps them separate. So with folks that are working with smaller rigs, more constrained systems, that they can, you know, pick and choose what they need for a particular set for a particular moment.
And what about, you mentioned steps kind of not wanting to build a full sequencer at this stage, but feeling like stepped CV was something that you wanted. What's that actually doing inside? Is it a shift register? Is it a string of sample and hold? What's the kind of technology behind steps?
Yeah, so it is shift register based, and hence the 8 steps being locked there. So it is, and that's why certainly when you first start it up, we're running it in random mode to kind of fill in the shift register with data, and then allowing it to kind of turn into the beast that it is, in the same way you'd think of like a Turing machine or Bungler or any of those type circuits. I mean, those are all shift register based step CV generators. So, and then wanted to wrap a burst generator around it, because one of the things that I always wanted when I was playing with any of those other shift register modules was being able to repeat an 8-step loop. So that I could find something that I liked and then fire that 8-step loop, not necessarily have to have it playing all the time. And so rather than having to burn an entire another module on a burst generator that would always be keyed at 8, that's why I essentially pulled that into the design. And then that enabled all kinds of interesting add-ons as well, with the being able to loop and do some additional interchange, or as you were mentioning earlier, being able to chain modules together.
It's a really musical thing to have a series of events happen and not be repeatable, as you say, but to not continually loop. It's
right.
I think many of us in modular are guilty of just letting the bleeps and bloops run with sequences and patterns that are endless, or maybe they are varying, but the kind of clocks and the pulses are continually going, be it a Euclidean rhythm or a clock or some interesting programmed rhythm. We tend to let things churn around, and that's great and also very musically useful. But I like this idea of do beep boop boop beep boop boop beep, and then this hold, but then I can't, already forgotten what I did, but that exact series of CV steps repeat itself reliably only when I tell it to. And it can loop or it cannot. And the fact the burst is tied in, I think, is really handy. My favourite thing about steps is exactly that I like burst generators. I like shift registers and random and being able to loop melodies. I may quantize them. It might just be modulation. But when they're together, there's something about being presented with a more kind of fleshed out idea that kind of tells you how to use it. The fact it's there and I can turn loop off means I use it. And maybe that makes me very lazy. but it does mean that I just go, oh, maybe I don't want it to loop. And I'll fire down a divided gate. So every few bars, every bar maybe, a phrase happens and then something holds. Maybe something else is modulating, or it's more of a call and response. A really nice thing I liked in the video was the stereo modulation call and response, which was the 2 oscillators in a piston Honda. Mark III, if I remember right. And I had two steps modules with the end of outputs firing one to the other. So the modulation would kind of call and response, and you could lock one of them and then not lock the other. So one side is repetitive, one isn't. Lock them both or not lock them both. And you get this really lovely interplay between them. I found it really incredibly, just musical. As I say, the idea of a pause or a rest or simply stopping isn't at the forefront of kind of everybody's modular use. So doing that was useful. I also think the gate output as well was a really useful addition. Just I like not necessarily end of outputs, which are useful, but kind of activity outputs is often how I look at them, where it's I am on while this module does something and then I go off, which is how the gate functions on steps there. I'll maybe pull that image up, it might be a little bit clearer. The gate output at the bottom, that's high while steps is active. So you can have a single trigger activate steps, and then through the duration of 8 steps you have a high voltage. It's really useful, and it's the same there on tilt with the rise and fall outputs. It's not end of rise, it's rise is active while you're in the rising stage, and likewise for fall. And I just find them incredibly useful, turning things on and off, having long sustained gates, not having everything be based on a trigger. It's just really nicely fleshed out. It's clear you've kind of done the homework of what's out there and how musically could I make use of this. How we Kermit or Piston Honda. Chris in the chat, that was a Piston Honda that I used for that part of the video. If I can get a timing stamp, I'll grab you one later. But it was a Piston Honda. All 3 are out of stock already. Are these already out of stock, Lenny?
Out of stock where? Sorry.
Mark Booth.
Is this said signal? Is this said signal sounds?
Maybe that might be. Yeah. Sorry about timing for that one. If you just found out and can't get one, hit the retailers tab on the Afterled site. I'll drop that in there. And also, if go on, sorry.
Sorry, I did see a question about Canadian retailers, and we are working there, and hopefully be able to announce something soon.
Okay, very nice. Somebody sampled Div Kid singing the bleeps. David, if you want to call me, you can have a whole rendition. Avoid the stream. I'll do it direct. I'll ring you up. You can pick a module that it goes through. We can arrange a singing bleep date if you want. That'd be pretty funny. And then whatever horribleness you want to do to my voice. Nothing I think will beat what I think was Soundflower giving me this Dalek-like AM ring mod thing as it decided it wasn't going to work in a previous stream. I also wanted to show just a little bit of background for some of the modules, because I'm quite happy with my own editing, if I'm being honest. It's kind of blowing my own trumpet a little bit. A little bit of the interview video, and I'll put the link to the full video in the chat while this plays. Now, of course, me doing or saying anything stupid is what tends to get most attention. There's a don't tempt me with the bleeps and bloops. I mean, do it and tag me in it. By all means, hack some audio from this and do as you wish. It would definitely kind of give me a bit of a smile. But again, just to open it up to questions, I'm going to quickly run down each of these modules and the kind of functions that they do. And maybe that will, any specific questions, general questions are welcome as well. So blend will take 2 voltages, be those audio or CV, and you can attenuate them and then control VCA CVs with those. So you could put in an LFO, invert it, and have that open and close the VCA that's on board. The VCAs can work entirely separately. So you could just have a kind of audio VCA or modulating modulators with CV. But then both of the channels of inputs give you blends based on these attenuated voltages. So min, max, a comparator, and a mixed output as well. So it's a real kind of ultra utility, if you like, in blend. I think once you actually tie the VCAs into what's going on as well and not use them separately is where I got kind of more excited about it. But we all need VCAs. I'm all for some free VCAs thrown in things. Steps is an internal clock generator, can be clocked externally, that will give you 8 steps of either random or looped random, so therefore feels less random once it's looping. It can loop or be burst, in which you trigger it and you get the 8 steps and that burst stops until it's told to run again. We get an end of burst output, which is a bit like kind of telling bass player, take a solo but only play 8 notes, and then the bass player kicking the drummer at the end, telling the drummer to do something else. And then tilt is the kind of multifunction surge patch programmable style function generator with the envelopes, LFOs, slews, oscillators. And also you could do some weird interesting PWM with that as well, if you were to take the rise and fall outputs and to be triggering audio rates and playing around with CV over rise and fall times. You could do some really interesting destructive audio with that one. How do you use tilt? Lenny, we've kind of quickly run through the other two slightly with you. Do you just have loads of them? And alongside Envy, you've got, a couple of tilts as LFOs, a couple of tilts as, how do they kind of fit in for you?
Yeah, it's one of my bars on readiness for a module is essentially how lost I get in testing. So in other words, if I go and drop these modules in a case, or what usually ends up being laying on a desk, just plugged in loose, because that's how I do most of the testing, so I can flip it over and be taking some voltage readings. Anyways, but when I end up, going to test something that should take 5 minutes, and I look at the clock and I find it's an hour later, that's a good indication on readiness. But one of my favorite ways for tilt is just kind of a little bit more unique because of that gate input, which essentially has a Schmidt trigger on it that pops a flip-flop circuit high, and then keeps the gate high, is putting in kind of a slow pulse wave. So you could take that out of something like Bosk, and using that to effectively modulate the slope generator, and then taking that slope generator into a wave folder, has been, because now you've got all kinds of sharp edges for that wave folder to really kick in and cause all kinds of havoc with it. But I really found that to be just kind of a nice unique use of tilt because of that a gate input, which isn't found on a lot of these modules.
I pull the image up again as well. It's also, unlike a lot of function generators, it does work as an ADSR. So the way that this would work as an envelope, you can switch into ADSR mode. You could also create envelopes in the slew mode as well, which makes sense in a second, hopefully. If you were to put a gate in there, you would rise while the gate is active. It will then fall while the gate is active, like a decay, which most function generators don't. It will then sustain, and then it will release with that fall voltage again, with separate shape control over the rise and fall. Now, if you were using it like a slew, this is how typically function generators would work, in that you could trigger a decaying envelope, or you could just have a gate where it will rise while the gate is active. If you go through the whole stage of rise time, it will just hold and just sustain, and then it will just fall at the end. So an attack, hold, release, or rise, sustain, fall, whatever three-stage envelope terminology that you want to use. Just distracted Dream in the chat. I love a good wave folder. Yeah, so do I. I love a good folder. So I found that really interesting, that it will ADSR as well. Is that quite a rework of the circuitry to make it do that? Because it might be the only function generator that does do full 4-stage ADSRs that I know of.
It was. There was actually some research done that was posted online. I was able to start from that gave me the original idea because I was looking at ways to add functionality in because my hope was to stick with this kind of six knob and either the 8 or 9 jack, and the ninth jack is essentially either a switch or a jack. And so I was trying to figure out how to add more functionality in. And so I was able to figure out how to do the bipolar and unipolar modes for the oscillation, and then also figuring out how to add this gate mode into the slew mode, so you got that full ADSR. So there was some good ideas to start with. I was able to kind of prove out and adjust through some breadboarding. It was a good time. It was learned a ton in doing it, and really glad to be able to share it with everybody.
A question from Obsidian Anvil asked, would you elaborate on what you might send an end of attack or end of rise output on the ADSR module, and what effect would that have? Asking for a friend. Again, just 'cause it's prettier than my face. Right hand module there, tilt. That doesn't have the end of outputs. Let me pull up. I realise you meant envy. Let me pull that up in the browser just quickly. But the end of outputs, do you want to go with that one, Lenny? Will I just find a link? What would you patch
sure, yeah. So,
end of outputs into?
So the delay trigger is kind of best had. I mean, I always use it to kind of cascade stuff together. So in other words, as Ben was calling out, being able to have something start, and so you might have one envelope start and then have another one kick in, or use it to kick off something like steps, where you might have an envelope start into the attack, so that you can get a nice kind of slow bleed in, and then have steps kind of fire off a set of step CV. That's been how I've always played with it and had a good time with it. I don't know, Ben, do you have any other?
Yeah, just as you were saying, there's envy there up on screen, which has the end of attack and end of release. End of attack, I like to mix percussive and fading envelopes. So once a slower swell may have occurred, to fire off another envelope. I've always found blending to either with a delayed trigger where I have to use a specific gate delay, where a key press on a keyboard, for example, will have two envelopes starting, but one of them slightly delayed to the other. But having an end of attack output, I find it useful for when I get to the peak of my sound, thinking of the envelope opening a VCA, for example, something happens. A nice example might be if you were to have, say, a saw wave into a filter, and the envelope is opening the filter, so that saw wave is getting richer, and as soon as you get through the attack and it starts to decay, that end of attack output maybe fires off another VCA, say some noise in, or a square wave with some PWM, or a sound that is maybe an octave higher or lower. So one sound swells, and as soon as it reaches its peak, another sound comes in. Kind of another section of the patch is activated, that maybe then either starts to rise itself as the other comes down, or they all kind of hit in that first peak. I always found that really useful and really kind of musically interesting when designing sounds. It might be, think as if you were designing the sound of a laser cannon for a game, kind of over the top cartoon, kind of carrying a big kind of laser cannon around. The rise is the charging of the laser. Like, I'm making this up as I go, bear with me. So you've got this the kind of rising sound, and as that comes down, you want the sound you're working with to decay away, but you want something else to happen. So all this energy is being built, and then at that pivotal point, the end of attack, everything bursts out and it fires the rest of a patch underway. There was a great podcast episode from Tone Benders, I'll see if I can find it shortly, but this years ago, of doing exactly that. They were talking about designing this kind of big cartoon kind of character of a big kind of laser cannon. How do you get a sound to charge? What happens at the kind of peak of that sound? So it can be really useful thinking it in that way. End of release, I like to think of, again, end of gestures, ends of phrases. An example I think I've used in the past several times is a burst of noise into an effect with an end of release. So my dry sound happens, and then maybe it's feeding a separate processing chain, and as the dry sound fades, there's a little kind of little burst at the end. that can work really well. With really short envelopes, you can create little flams. For example, if you look at, say, an 808 clap sound, is it 4 or 5? You might know more specifically than me on that, Lenny. 4 or 5 decay envelopes kind of all laid together. I don't know if you've seen that before.
I've not.
So, typical clap sound, you would put noise into a VCA and just have it decay. Just typical noise clap. But thinking of a group of people clapping, or classic soul records on Motown where people are clapping on 2 and 4, everybody's timing is slightly off. So you can use these end of outputs as just slight delays in timing to trigger other envelopes, other activity, and create these, what we call a flam, about at least a drummer would, where all these attacks kind of slightly line up. So it can be quite experimental. I think if you time the envelopes nicely, it can be a very rhythmic device. It might be that you have a rise perfectly timed to a quarter note, and then the end of attack fires off something else on beat 2, for example. It's just a case of playing around, I think. But I'll make note to maybe try and include some of those with a rise and fall activity, and maybe how that's different to Envy in an upcoming video. I'd like to make complex LFO shapes by chaining them in a loop. That was Dream. Yeah, you could have 2 of them and have the end of the release fire off the next one and have the other come back, and you kind of create this feedback loop going. You could have Envy and Tilt kind of playing off of each other. Well, the rise of Tilt is active. That might gate Envy. The Tilt may then just fall away. There's a big release on Envy, and at the end of release, the trigger gets Tilt going again. So it'd be a really interesting way, a very kind of modular way, if you like, rather than using pre-baked waveforms, of having more interesting modulation. Let me go back to the chat, as I feel I've completely gone off on designing charging laser kind of sounds. I lost myself in that one for a moment.
More bleep loop sounds for the video to come.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
There we go. The sample pack of this live stream. We had a question from Chris Walker. More general question. It looks like Afterlater Audio is combining very interesting features in original modules that you don't get anywhere else. What other crazy franking modules are on your mind? Now, I always say this to everybody. Only give away what you want. Don't feel pressured.
Yeah, sure.
There's certainly been streams before where people are like, come on, tell us what's coming. And that's up to people what they give away. But be as general or specific as you like on that.
Yeah, sure. So first, thanks for the compliment there. That's certainly been the goal, is to bring some things together, but yet keep it nice and small, so people can again pick and choose what they want for a particular moment. The next, what you can think about from just kind of a grand scheme of what's coming up next, is these first set of modules were really about kind of proving out the full voice and really learning a lot of the core circuitry that's used in a lot of these kind of core synthesis techniques. And so then the next set of modules will start to really be a bit more complex, a bit more fully robust, which you think of as kind of more full, complete traditional modules that we have that you see today. So I've got a lot of good thoughts in what those need to be and what those are going to look like. But those are that's what's behind me on the desk back there on the breadboarding in the lab space, if you will. That's what's being worked on right now. So, and they're still taking shape. That's why, I mean, I wouldn't want to talk about it too much anyways, but that's why so scant on details today. But there is, I think I saw a question earlier too about the Benjalin and the partnership with Rob, which kind of could play into this as well, which I can talk to. Should I take that now, or? Yeah,
that was Gerald Ford as a comment. Just that he said, I'd like to hear more about the new Benjalin that Lenny is working on with Rob Hordyke. He's hoping that we can talk about that. So yeah, that seems like a good time to bring that one in.
Yeah, great. So that'll hopefully the supply chain will will allow us hopefully be the next module that we get to release. And as got in touch with Rob, I don't know, about 4 or 5 months ago, and started working together on doing this redesign. And it was really kind of enlightening, just learning from Rob about a lot of the constraints that he had put on this original design, and including the whole, for those that are familiar with the schematic of the original Benjamin, the whole 9-volt regulator part of this was because the original schematic was battery powered, and so trying to take 9 volts and then do an inverted 9-volt as well, so that he could stay battery powered with the schematic. So it wasn't a Eurorack design at all. And so what we've essentially done over these last number of months is being able to cater it to the Eurorack format. So you can expect to see all the leveling and all that kind of non-standard implementations there will be fixed, as well as some fairly significant changes to the oscillator, but mostly in the filter section. He did a lot of redesign work on the filter, and we added a handful of good features, as well as some expansion capabilities as well. So there's I think a lot of goodness there to make it interesting for folks that even might have an existing Benjamin, because it's gonna really expand out a lot of the potential of the Benjamin as well.
For those that maybe don't know what the Benjamin is, can we have a quick rundown? It's 2 oscillators, a filter, and a rungler, which is a shift register kind of stepped random generator.
Step CV generator.
Is that that in essence? Have I missed anything there?
No, that's it. And then the kind of glory of it all is how it's all interconnected together. So the kind of default patch, if you will, that's on it, is taking that step CV and routing them to each of the oscillators. One of the oscillator controls the clock timing of the shift register, the others controlling the data. So it's really can turn into a rather kind of chaotic noise, but you can also tame it down and just get a nice kind of 101 style bleep bloop. I won't even try to keep up with Ben on my bleep bloop capabilities here, but it'll as well as that step CV is then routable straight to the filter. So all that is kind of built in to create this very something that you can range very easily and quickly, from a nice simple melody straight out into just kind of pure raining chaos. It's easy to control between all of that range. And again, it's just another one of those modules where I plug it in to test it and find myself an hour later that I've more than sufficiently tested the module, and just now playing. But yeah, it's really excited to get this one out there.
We did have a question from David Sign Mountain, which was any self-patching ideas for these modules?
Self-patching ideas. Oh, from on the new modules.
Yeah, for blend, steps, tilt. And do any come to mind for you straight away? Was that something in mind, kind of self-patching as you were designing these?
No, I mean the big thing as far as self-patching, which really isn't true to that question, was on the daisy chaining of steps. It was one of the things as I put them together, and was playing with them and wanting to really get more complicated steps. It actually caused a lot of design chaos, if you will, as I was designing, because of needing to take clock outputs, which got really complicated because of electrons are just always not always doing what you want them to do.
Yeah.
Anyways, but that was one of the big things as far as getting them to work together, was getting multiple steps modules together. But then also, between themselves, certainly, I think they all interchange nicely. But yeah, within a particular module, I'm not really thinking of anything that pops, at least in my mind.
In the chat we've just had, just listening to After Later audio on Podmod. That was something that I was just going to share. I'll grab a link. It's maybe not the best place to look at it, but the website that they use for the podcast. Lenny was just on Tim Held's Podular Modcast on Podmod recently. Did Clarissa, your partner in life and business, did go on that one with you as well?
Yeah, she did. So we're lucky enough to live not far from Tim, and so Tim came over, and both Clarissa and I are on that. It was great having her on because she's such a huge part of the business. I mean, most interactions that folks are having on email, social media, wherever it may be, is actually interacting with Clarissa. It's only if things get into technical questions or other more complicated usage questions that I'll get pulled in. But she's really kind of the manager of the entire business. So. When she's not answering those questions, she's burning flux in the office space there and actually making modules. So she's literally kind of the lifeblood of the business.
Yeah, you've joked before the whole family can build a monsoon or a typhoon now.
Yeah, it's quite true. I mean, even all the tilts, blends, and steps. We would put a movie on, and we'd all kind of sit around the coffee table, and we'd have an assembly line going. Hopefully I don't get in trouble with any child labor laws, but you know.
It's so wholesome. I love that. You need to start putting cards in, like a family picture per batch. Your module was built to, and what the film was that you had on. It's such a nice, wholesome thing to think it went through the family's hands. It's really cool. Back to David's question about self-patching. On an original, I'm thinking of this patch programmability, on an original Surge slope generator, the slopes are linear. And if you patch the output of, let's say a triangle-like slope, a voltage that just rises and falls, similar rise and fall time, that would be a linear triangle-like wave. But if you patch the output back into the CV input, it kind of bends back on itself. And that's how you would create an exponential envelope. Now, we don't need to do that with tilt because we have shape controls. But that was one of the first things when this idea of self-patching came in. As I call it, it's kind of doing that anyway. I just have to patch that. If I use my surge gear, a lot of modern function generators you don't. You get a shape. You can patch it when it's oscillating back out into itself for kind of interesting behaviors, back into its rise, back into its fall. It's very much like patching an oscillator's output back into its own FM input. It's kind of pulling itself around. Depending on the designs, and I'd have to go back and try tilt, sometimes that's really interesting sonically, sometimes it's quite stable, sometimes it's not. I'd have to go try it to know what the response was. I can't quite remember from trying.
I mean, the shape controls are really just bringing in some of the feedback from the output back into the rise control. So that I mean, internally, that's pretty much what it's doing.
Yeah, and then for steps, really, it's not self-patching, but it makes me think of a pair of steps, as you said, having one chained to the other. Maybe having the random gate output, kind of self-patching within the after later system, if you like. Maybe the random gate out is what fires your envelopes, which say opens your VCAs or your filters. The clock output is maybe clocking tilt, or the pulse output is the clock, but only while the steps is active. So you trigger steps as a burst. You get a gate that is high for the duration of those 8 steps. At the end of that, you get an end of burst output. You get a random gate that has random gate length, which was really cool. It wasn't just short triggers. It would hold some steps longer than others. And then you get the clock output, which is always active, and a pulse output, which is the clock during the activity of steps. So that allows for a lot of patching around a system. Not necessarily self-patching, because the trigger in, does it ignore triggers while it's active? So you can't kind of
it does
actively
trigger pulses, or
you can't actively
and that was
re-trigger.
Yeah, and I know that was a question that came up on the original videos, or on the videos that you posted. The whole idea there, it was certainly a design decision, but I was trying to maintain the start and stop point in the register, and so it was essentially a choice of either maintaining the start or stop and ignoring triggers, or allowing the burst to continue another 8 steps, essentially resetting the decade counter, resetting that, and allowing another 8 steps. But then when you started the next time, it would be in a different spot in the shift register. So, anyways,
So
just a design limitation of using shift registers over something more digital, yeah.
but as you say, you would lose if you've locked in 8 steps as a repeatable bursted pattern or looping pattern. You would then, as you say, lose your looped 8 steps, which kind of goes against the point of being able to capture it.
Exactly.
So that makes perfect
sense.
Blend offers a lot of self-patching, I think, that works very well, in that because the 2 VCAs can function entirely separately, you could be blending, say, 2 LFOs, 2 oscillators, and creating these min-max variations, and then possibly having, say, the minimum output CV controlling one VCA and the maximum controlling another one. That would be a patch that would work really nicely in stereo, even if you take the same sound. So if you split, and again, this is on screen, it's the left-hand module. If you imagine taking the same waveform, any you like, let's just say a triangle wave, to the 2 VCA inputs, and we take VCA1 hard left, VCA2 hard right. We take 2 LFOs, any kind of rate you like, into input 1 and 2, and then we use minimum to open and close one VCA and maximum for the other. You'll get this kind of opposed panning, and if you've got unsynced LFOs, you'll get some very interesting movement between the two. You could also then, thinking of patching across the wider system, the comparator on blend could be used to activate steps or tilt, or have, say, 2 LFOs going into each other in blend, and when one is higher than the other, the comparator will be active, and maybe that changes the rate of tilt that is your LFO, for example. There's lots of kind of inter-patching opportunities, more so than singular kind of self-patching, I think, on this one. Blend, though, there's lots of opportunities for blend, and this will be one, good question, David, because it'll be one that I'll bring up in the demo video for blend. Having mixed outs, min, max, comparator outs, you also get a mixed VCA out. So if you want to blend 2 VCAs into one and still kind of mash your voltages together, you can. Very flexible in that regard. Chris Walker asks, is steps analog or digital?
You know, I've been going for walks every morning, and I was actually just wondering how I'd answer this question if it was asked to me, because it's all around. You consider a shift register or a flip-flop circuit to be analog, which I guess it is. I mean, the flip-flop circuits in here are even discrete circuits, but it's still storing ones and zeros. So anyways, I think by today's definitions, this would be considered analog. I think if you were to look at this 30, 40 years ago, it might have been considered digital. So anyways, but yeah, again, I think today you'd call them all analog. There's certainly no software. There's no firmware running here.
Yeah, I think Bucket Brigade delay chips are often called analog, and I've seen people kind of jump on that and go, no, they're not analog. I don't know the technologies, but a BBD delay chip is certainly way more analog than most delays. So I think that's kind of fair. I think you can get away with a shift register being analog.
Yeah, I think today that's allowed.
Yeah, as a follow-up, Chris asked, reason they're asking is that if you run an audio rate square wave into the clock on steps, what will happen? Can it be clocked at audio rates?
Yeah, there should be, because that's just going. I mean, it's a Schmidt trigger into the clock on the shift register, and yeah, it should work for both clocking the decade counter, which is what you'd be clocking in the bottom section there on the sequencer, as well as on the shift register. I've tried it on the shift register. I've never actually tried it on the decade counter, but it should work. Yeah, it should work up to anything in the audio spectrum should work there.
What you would get if it was random would be kind of like a stepped noise source, like a sometimes called downsampled noise, sampled at the rate of whatever your audio rate frequency was. But when you actually lock that into 8 steps, you will get a stable pitch and an interesting kind of locked waveform that if you use a square wave clock that will volt per octave track, you could then volt per octave track your custom 8-part kind of locked audio wave. Now, it being random and shift register based, it may all be positive. It may be not much level range to it. You're going to get varied results with it kind of shifting randomly and then locking it. But you get some interesting tones. It'd be quite interesting to drive that from a sequenced source. That's something I'll use for the video. So for anyone that's joined later, there's been a few Pi just joined kind of comments. There is a demo video for these 3 new modules. I'll put them back on screen. Blend, steps, and tilt. But in the coming weeks, around 2 weeks from now, and then 2 weeks on and 2 weeks on, I'll make an in-depth deep dive on each of these modules. So I'm using this stream really as a little bit of a what would you like to see? Any questions that you ask here, and maybe things I can directly address in video form, where I can take time to edit something nicely together and not just hash away making laser sounds and bleeps and bloops with my mouth, which I've been doing so far. Nice point from Chris Meyer in the live chat. Maybe we need to use the term computerized as an in-between analog and digital. Yeah, that kind of work. Or that software. I think Chris is right with that comment saying that air quotes software to distinguish what people think or what he thinks people mean when they say digital. A shift register to me is not digital. It's not software.
This came up because of the G&T module. Had somebody asking this very specific question about analog versus digital, and I had that's what kind of spurred this kind of deep thought on my part. But yeah, I agree that I believe what people mean is certainly, is it running firmware? Is it running software? Is it something I have to update? Is it the other big concern that folks seem to have is the latency that's involved, especially in modulation sources.
You mentioned G&T. An interesting Chris Meyer is with us in the live chat. Hey, Chris, if I've not said hello yet. From Feeding the Monster, Feeding the TARDIS, from learningmodular.com. This came up in our last stream. G&T, Gates and Triggers, another original module from yourself. So this will take a gate at the input, and it gives you a trigger at the onset of the gate, at the rise, and one as it falls, right? That's the top section.
Exactly.
And then the bottom takes a trigger, and you define via the knob a length for the gate.
Right, a gate length. Yeah, as well as then a fall trigger on that gate. So essentially enabled a bit of another delayed trigger opportunity there.
So that's, gate delays is super powerful. It's one of those that I looked at it. It's 2 HP, unassuming. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Unassuming little module, but just doing its thing. It's incredibly handy. Things like, say, striking low-pass gates that don't have strike inputs like make noise modules do, or hit or pluck or clang is a term that some companies use. Just being able to turn all your sustained sources into triggers, but also then get the output as that kind of fallout, that delayed output. But vice versa, it's always kind of harder to make a gate length, to make something sustain. And it, again, very well priced. $84 people will see in the corner of the screen, and super handy. That was one of those I was like, oh, I need to get some of those ordered. Just one of those utilities where you're just like, it's just a no-brainer. It's like, yep, I need some of those, gonna have to get some of those. A few people have mentioned it in the live chat as well. G&T is on the list. Yeah, it should be. It's certainly on my list. G&T. I like the name as well. Not that I drink G&T.
Well, yeah, the name was certainly inspired by all my trips over to your side of the pond there. So
plenty of London Dry.
Yes.
So at this point, we've been running for around an hour. And we'll go as long as kind of questions are coming in. We've no time constraint, but we're also not aiming to hang out for hours endlessly. So this isn't a last call necessarily, but it is a call to questions. If anybody has any questions relating to Bosk, Filthy, Envy, I'll put images of those up on screen. Maybe some of the Clouds variants, other Afterlater audio projects. Just you're curious as to what Lenny was doing with a 303 and an SH101, as we mentioned earlier on. Any questions at all, get them in the live chat. And now we kind of wait awkwardly for the buffer between OBS and YouTube for those to come in. But one thing I wanted to ask is, where do you what's next? And that's always a kind of really silly question in my mind. I say that as I ask it. When you've just released something new and someone goes, what's next? It's like, well, enjoy the thing we've just put out. But where is this going? Do you have in mind, is there an Afterlater voice to come? Is it a case of just filling out interesting, these are cool modules that, as you said earlier, you got lost testing on the breadboard, really interesting functions or sonic qualities? Is there a desire to have a system or a voice, or are you looking for little areas of the market maybe that are not quite as tied together as people have noticed here, that blend, steps and tilt tie together multiple things in a nice package? The kind of general sailing of the ship of Afterlater, if you like. What's kind of the plan, if you like?
Yeah, sure. So certainly the next steps after this, while you'll continue to see, I think, some smaller, simpler modules from us. There, as I'm just kind of thinking through what I've been playing with recently, I will probably, those were more kind of experiments. I'm finding a lot of success in some of those, so that those might actually end up coming out as modules as well. But really, the next big focus from a design perspective is on some more full, complete modules that offer a lot of pre-patching, but bring a lot of functionality to the table. So that it's not just these kind of single function modules that you're seeing. And granted, there's a lot of functionality packed into the 6 HP. You can start to see that multiplied out if I was to do a much bigger module, and also offer a bit more space for folks that don't like the dense modules. So I'm going to try to make the next designs a bit bigger and probably a bit more playable, and a bit fewer accidental knob bumps that you might get in some of the more dense designs. So that's certainly where a lot of my focus, my engineering time is right now. Hence wanting to play with some of these smaller circuits to add on just to some of the knowledge of what we've built so far. But I do see then after we get through those, I certainly can see a time of trying to bring all this together into something a bit more full and complete voice perspective. That's a bit more complicated and deep than a kind of a single oscillator or double oscillator Bosk style. So I can certainly see getting this into something being a bit bigger and again more complete voice.
One question we did have relating to the kind of production of these, Mark Booth asked, how long did it take to go from concept to retail for the 3 new modules?
I had these, what I thought was mostly done last December.
Okay.
It was probably in concept stage back in October. But then again, I get it back and I play with it and I find another thing to add. And that's how they continue to get denser and denser and denser with functionality as I continue to play and continue to tweak and just try to add more and more in. Certainly the COVID situation that we're all suffering through, and the supply chain disruption certainly slowed things down there in the earlier part of the year, and even in the December time period because of the dependency on the Chinese manufacturing for a lot of PCBs, et cetera. But it was certainly a journey. There's again also a lot of learning in there on my side. Hoping that the next round can take a bit less time. I mean, it was probably roughly a year from original kind of drawing on paper to actually releasing. Maybe 10 months, somewhere around there.
Chris Walker asked, the question for you specifically, Lenny, not for me. He told me to stick to YouTube, just playing around, of course, and just joking. But to his general wish, he often feels that small patch videos, for example on Instagram, help a lot with original modules. Would you consider this for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. What I learned in my first attempts at doing videos is that it's a dedication. It's something that you've got to really be dedicated to and have a full setup for. And I've just not gotten to that. And that's why you've not seen a lot of content. You might have seen again some kind of short teases from us on Instagram, but that's been it. At some point, I do want to get better. It just hasn't been there. But some of the modules that we have coming up, that I still want to just reach behind me and show, but I'm not going to because I'll probably end up changing it and taking 6 months to get it out there. They're really a bit more different than kind of a standard module, and so it's really going to take me doing a walkthrough on it and really trying to explain it to everybody so that people get it and can grok it. Can understand how to tame it and how to really unleash it, because it can be a bit much at times.
Yeah. Is Bosk coming from a Star Wars character? I've missed any reference, if that means something to you.
I think Bosk was the green guy? I remember the action figure because I used to have all the action figures, right? I mean, I'm in the age range to have collected all the original action figures. So anyway, no, that was Greedo or Greto. I forget. No, Bosk was I was at actually a Modular Nights or not Modular Nights, the Modular on the Spot here in Seattle. I was out at Gasworks Park and trying to figure out what to name these things, and just was trying to find things with the abbreviated, because you don't have a lot of space in a 6 HP module to put a big name. So it's essentially you get 4 or 5 characters, and I was trying to do a play on the shortened names, but make an actual name. So hence the OSC and putting a B in front of it to come up with Bosk, and then the ENV for Envy, and trying to come up with ways I could make creative names that again aren't used and will just kind of stand out in the overall naming. So anyways, that's the history and background on where the names came from.
Yeah.
But it literally came in one walk while I was at a park one day after struggling with it for months, and just kind of had a sudden moment of inspiration.
Your audio's ticking again, Lenny. I don't know if it's something you can hear or do anything about, but Minecraft says it's the NSA listening in. Some offers for sending modules out. People will do Instagram videos for you. Gerald, you're stepping on my world here. That's my trick. Go away.
Yeah, and I think Matt too, EasyBot, just did a video for us on G&T as well to walk through some of those kind of patch examples you were mentioning at the beginning or while we were going through it.
Yeah. I'll try and find those in a second and pull those in. There's some great videos from both EasyBot's own channel and for Patchworks. He's doing all of the Patchwork store videos as well. Yeah. Some cool stuff from Matt, definitely.
Yeah.
Effects Music asked, it would be nice to mix the different waveform outputs on Bosk. So why has Filthy not got more inputs? It does have 2 inputs now, Filthy, right?
It does have two. It has two audio inputs now. Yeah, they're just mixed together. But yeah, we did just add a second one when I just did a quick refresh on it and did two FM inputs as well as two audio inputs.
Yeah. For me, that would be enough for most things. If I was wanting to really push an oscillator into a filter more than that, I might take a square and a saw and blend them at the inputs to the filter, and then maybe take the sine to frequency modulate the filter. So to modulate the filter with the same oscillator that's going into the filter. That can be quite an interesting tone, and a very stable tone as well, because it's all from the same source. It's all at the same pitch.
Yeah.
But generally...
I was just going to add in that if there was a desire to do more, we also have the 3-to-1 module so that folks can get a nice quick way of blending essentially the more than two. So you can get the 3-to-1. It can also be a 6-to-1.
I was going to say a mixer, standard vintage synth oscillator section, mixer, filter.
Yeah.
And when I'm really thinking of mixing waves, personally, not to take away from any desire effects music may have, or others, of course, I generally want to kind of really get in at the levels. I maybe want a little bit of voltage control going on. Maybe I'd use the VCAs in blend to get a more animated mix of waves that then feed the filter. I'm usually looking for a bit more control. There's just something about just single saw or square, good filter, just done. I think it's so much classic so many classic bass lines in electronic music, the stability of just single oscillator. Pick the slightly hollower square or the richer saw, done. I still love my SH09 for that very reason, that it's just such a lovely simple synth. Similar in sound. I'm not quite sure what the chipset in an SH09 is. I think the filter might be slightly different to a 101, but similar in tone to the Heritage line. Yeah. We did have a couple more questions. David Powland. Hey, David. David took me to Lenny's house to film the interview. David is the one doing the purring cat noise at the start of the interview. There's a meow, and it wasn't even a cat that went past, it was a dog. That's David, if anyone's curious. But David asks, when will we see some effects modules? Any desire to kind of delve into effects?
So I haven't tipped into effects at this point. I am getting into something to, again, add a bit more harmonic tone and harmonic richness, but not gone into any of the kind of end of chain, if you will. So if I was to go into that, that's where I typically start going into digital or software based, as we were agreeing to call it earlier. So I'll probably get into that after that kind of journey that I just mentioned, which has probably got me going for a couple of years, I would guess. Just kind of looking at past experience. But because I also, my day job, I get to work with a lot of software. And so this being the hardware work and circuit design work that I get to do for after later is a great diversity for me. Yeah. Being able to stay away from software and having all the challenges that come with then maintaining and keeping software going.
Thanks to David Ramirez and Benjamin Izzo for the super chats. Really appreciate the support. Thank you very much. Super chat is open on YouTube if people feel like donating. But of course, thank you for being here regardless. If you can give the video a thumbs up, that will help YouTube push it out while we're still active now and in the future as it lives on YouTube. So thumbs up would be just as great too. Chris Walker asked, which module companies inspire you? Obviously Mutable. With the various bits of Mutable that you offer, but any other module companies that you really love?
So just on the Mutable one, it's just been incredibly powerful to be able to get a module and then completely study its schematic. And that's true, even though I'm not making, I mean, Emily's certainly has a lot of richness on the digital side. And I've learned a lot there, but even the ones that she's chosen to release on the analog side, just learned an absolute ton there and continue to appreciate that. But then as far as outside of that, the place where I actually have been getting most of my inspiration and most of my interest from, and it started from the tilt design, was on the Surge side. So just looking through a lot of those old designs, and then you can, as you start to familiarize yourself with those, you can go and look at a lot of the modular companies today, and you can see all that inspiration and all the riffs that folks have made on all of those kind of original schematics and original concepts. But going back to those and just really learning and trying to understand how those work has been really motivational and has really kept me interested and challenged on the hardware side. And that's why those designs are really why you'll see me continue to invest in these analog or not non-software based modules.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the kind of inspiration coming right through a lot of companies from, say, Serge's work. There's an interesting thread on Facebook recently of, I think, somewhat a genuine question as to who was the original Eurorack company. And without getting into naming names, a couple of companies that were at least 15 years later than Dieter Doepfer's kind of origination of the format in the mid-90s kept coming up. And I kind of smiled, not in a judgmental way or condescending way, but just we're at that point where this has now been around long enough for its kind of origins to not disappear, because I think people kind of push up. Certainly Dieter Doepfer is such a cool dude, and he's always around, super supportive, really happy that the scene's kind of going from strength to strength. But it's kind of interesting now that more people are coming into it from different backgrounds and maybe so new to synths in general, and Eurorack's just a thing. I mean, me getting into electronic production, modular was around, but it wasn't a thing you found. I was kind of way into synths and software for a long time before I found modular. So it's kind of interesting that you then maybe see certain modules that think were the origination of the idea, and you're kind of like, no, you're a good 40 years late to this one. But that happens all through life, and it's interesting that people want to kind of weave back in history, and maybe some of us don't. But next question: when will the trio of modules be back in stock at Signal Sounds?
That is a good question. I'm sure the team there will be in touch. They might have reordered already, because we did get a reorder. I didn't actually go through it, but hopefully soon. Those guys have been really great to work with and super on top of everything. So I'm sure if they disappeared this weekend, I'm sure we'll hear from them early next week sometime. Yeah,
I was going to joke that it was Michael Letchford that asked that. Tell them Ben said to get their finger out and get a reorder in. I'm only joking. Jason and Alex and Kyle do great work at Signal Sounds, and they're incredibly busy. But if they're out of stock, knowing Signal Sounds, they'll have reordered.
Yeah.
And, I guess the point is, do you have stock, or at least parts to make stock to get restocks out? These aren't going away anywhere anytime soon.
I'll just.
There you go, Michael. That might be the one you buy. You can have the masking tape for free.
There you go. No, but there's actually made one sitting back here as well. So yes, we've got plenty of stock. We're ready to go.
Gerald Ford, I didn't know what it was on about first, and I can't see it. I might have to full screen you. Is that a Simon Cowell cutout in the background? And does he make the final judgments before deciding to release a module or not?
No, so I'm a football or soccer fan, depending on how you.
Oh, I can see the faces on the shelf.
Phrase it. And those are actually some of our players that are, some of the handouts at the match that I bring back, and don't want to throw them away, so I put them up as tchotchkes on the wall.
There we go. Kind of an interesting, odd one, I guess. This question from Ed Random. You know clouds really well, obviously, but looking at the original module, excuse me, could you make something like that, for instance, or is the module really genius?
Make something like that.
It's a kind of jumbled question. I guess it's a case of having spent time kind of dissecting it, learning from it, going through the different variants, typhoon, monsoon, microcell, and so on. Is it a really genius module, having kind of dissected it that way, or well, I don't know what the R is. I don't know what the alternative is.
So, I mean, I think my experience with clouds was that it was one of the early modules bringing granular synthesis into Eurorack, and so it was a kind of a huge aha moment. I think the added bit on top of that is with Emily's generosity of opening up and making the firmware available for folks, and folks starting to be able to continue to tweak on that. And then the hardware on top of that, you've seen, and this is all rooted in this kind of original passion and aha moment that happened with this Clouds release, has really turned it into kind of a legacy of granular synthesis in the Eurorack world. It's what brought it in, and because of this continued innovation, people continuing to play with the design, tweak it, and then in most cases at least make those design files available for folks has really allowed it to just to continue to grow and flourish. And I think that those designs, the added design work that's happened there, really addresses some of the original challenges of the original module. So I've been really happy to see how that's been grown, and then also happy to be able to help make them available for folks so they can enjoy them.
Mm-hmm. We did have a little bit of Brexit talk, which I didn't want to inject too much political content into the stream, but it's a very relevant point, and also just a nice general question as it rounds off at the end. Ed Random said, until the 31st of December, signal sound is okay for Europe, for the EU, but next year not anymore. Please, can you get an EU supplier? I think you said earlier you're speaking to a couple of people in the EU, right?
We are. We're trying. And hopefully we'll be able to break through and get some stock there in Central Europe. Certainly understand the ask, and hopefully we'll have some success there.
Yeah.
Certainly reach out, ask your retailers. We're certainly happy to work with some more folks there. So.
Yeah. As you said earlier, just to mirror what I said, that, mentioning to shops, hey, I'd love to get this and I'd like to get it from you, is really helpful for the brands and for the stores. So yeah, I definitely feel what happens after the 31st of December, but we won't go too into that. Chris Walker, burn a patch wish steps into the function generator and also directly into a VCO, and then trigger the function as a slew with the random gates out of steps for gated slewed notes in the random sequence. Noted. I will go back through this video and through the live chat. There is a live chat replay, which not always instantly available after a chat, but it certainly regenerates in time. I'll go back through. Any particular patches are welcome at this stage. We'll do a kind of final call for questions, but also there are in-depth videos to come for blend, tilt, and steps. So if, like Chris has said there, patch this into this, into this, into this, I'll try it. If it works, I can credit you in the video with asking me to do it. I'm certainly happy to put kind of requests for patches in the video where it makes sense. Someone asked if you were 7 foot tall, Lenny, or in the basement. I said you're in your basement.
yeah. I know I'm a short guy, but certainly been enjoying the shadow dancing that I can do here as I walk around. But yeah, camera lights. Anyways.
Chris, following up, you could also mute the non-slewed sequence with the random gate out so the sequences don't meet. That's an interesting kind of all-intertwined patch for me to try. DB Powlan, people definitely looking forward to a Clouds V2. Yeah, if and when that's happening. I know Emily's kind of announced in some public comment sections that she's out of Euro soon, which is a real shame. Her impact has been massive. Just as you were saying, Lenny, is a way of really learning what something does. Her contributions are definitely much appreciated across the scene. The basement.
And
Sorry. Go on.
I just wanted to add that they'll be felt for decades after she's out as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Question for Lenny. Ooh, this is a cheeky one from Pete. Any discount coupons for the After Later Audio website? I was wondering.
I wish we could right now, but we're quite frankly struggling to keep up with demand. So not at this point, but there's always a chance maybe later this summer, but certainly not right now.
Yeah. I like a direct, cheeky question. As long as, it's hard to tell in text sometimes. I'm sure it was very well intentioned. But P just saying they wanted to order a couple of things and we're just wondering. Keep checking back, I guess. I know you've quite a quick turnaround for production, right? You can get boards in quite quickly. You're not one to be out of stock for long periods of time. These things will be around and available, not to be, right?
Yeah, the things that we do let sit out of stock is really to kind of let demand build back up in some cases. But in general, we're generally, it shouldn't be any more than a week or two that things are out of stock on purpose.
MIDI Amsterdam and Schneider's are both very good people. Yes, they are. I know Schneider's and the staff very well. I don't know MIDI Amsterdam as well, but I hear very good things about the shop. I'd love to go visit. I'd love to get out of the house at the moment, truth be told. We are allowed out, but I certainly can't go to MIDI Amsterdam at the minute. Chris also mentioned if that patch is messed up, don't mention my name. It won't make the video. If the patch is so out there that it makes no sense, I won't be looking to blame anyone. I'll just pull it in the edit. David Ziza, I think the last name. What makes filthy? They do love a dirty filter.
So it is actually, from a sound perspective, I think it's actually fairly clean.
Yeah.
And the filthy name was more on the it being really good rather than on the dirt quality of it, if you will. But you'll see in some of the upcoming modules, I continue to play with a similar concept. So, anyways.
Yeah. That patch I mentioned earlier of taking, if you say take a saw or a square into a filter, and you take its sine or triangle to frequency modulate the filter, you can start to impart some stable dirt, if you like. That's a nice starting point. Effects Music said, will I demo the Bosk? I did do some and a write-up for a music magazine that hasn't appeared online yet, so maybe, because it's deserving of one, I may just do a Bosk video after these, just to kind of get the sound out there. And audio rate PWM is really nice on it. That would be something nice to highlight as well. By the way, Pachinko versus Kara, can you talk about the usability and the differences? They are variants on marbles, right?
That's right. So Pachinko, I think it's either 2 or 4 HP bigger. I think it's just 2 HP bigger. But the big thing there is that it, from a skiff perspective, it goes down to the 25 millimeter rather than the 35 or 36 or whatever thickness there. So it keeps it a bit flatter. And then with Pachinko, we use our new aluminum knobs on there. So they're it's just a different feel than the potentiometer, the plastic potentiometers, and gives you a bit more space because of that extra 2 or 4 HP. Again, I forget which it is, but functionality is completely identical. From a personal perspective, when I'm in my own rack, I find the Pachinko a bit more usable. That's why we just started carrying it, was that I was finding using the Kara to be a bit constraining, and that the Pachinko offered all the goodness of the marbles layout, but you still could save a bunch of space there. So
yeah.
Anyways, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think I'd go slightly bigger. 2 or 4 HP would make sense. I've put a note in the chat for final call for questions before we look to wrap up. Anyone watching or any questions that come as we wrap up, feel free to ask in the comments. If I can't answer, Lenny may be watching, or I can ask directly. If not, we'll certainly both be attentive to any future questions too. But mentioning all these variants on its mutable modules and ornament and crimes up there, the original free heritage line modules, there's a lot on the site. Skinny patch cables, which is something else. When I was looking at G&T, I was like, oh yeah, I need to grab some skinny cables. There's one of those. It's a kind of in true shop fashion, not just having, say, just the heritage line. I was like, oh yeah, I could do one of those. Oh, and a couple of those around the system would be useful, and maybe I need some more of them.
And we just added the rack screws as well, which was because we wanted to start including rack screws in with modules, which for the longest time we didn't do, and people finally started asking questions about it, and I realized we should be including rack screws anyway. So I wanted to make something a little bit nicer than the standard having to sit there and count washers and screws out and put them in the baggies. So we went and added the rack screws as well, which have done really well. People seem to really like them.
I was going to say a Seattleite. I don't know what you call yourselves in Seattle, but I presume...
You got it.
Right, there we go. Drew Bregel, Beacon Hills...
Who lives in our old house.
Oh, okay.
Which was such a weird thing to figure out.
Hey, I'm in your old house. Because well, they started with Beacon Hill's finest modules, and I was like, all right, they know where you are.
Yeah.
And then a very specific question: who is your favourite coffee roaster in town?
So I actually don't drink coffee, but my wife Clarissa drinks, and she's I believe it's Vita coffee that we get down at All City. But that's the main Seattle coffee roaster that we use is Cafe Vita. But I'm a tea drinker, so I'm a specifically oolong tea drinker. Have probably 6 or 7 different varieties that I cycle through upstairs.
For anyone in the UK, well, we're doing a coffee shout out, totally unsponsored, but if on the very off chance someone at Casa Espresso in Bradford is listening and wants to send me coffee, I'm shameless for this stuff. I'll take free coffee for a shout out. But they're not. Casa Espresso, if you're in the UK, great little micro roaster. That's some of the best coffee I've had in a long time. For anyone curious to try some coffee. Bit of away from Seattle though for you, Drew. Well, we give people a few minutes just for kind of that final call for questions. Anything you'd like to end on? Any kind of we've kind of touched a lot on kind of where you're at, what you're experimenting with, but any kind of closing statements, as it was or as it were?
Yeah. So the big thing that I feel every day that I get to sit down here and interact with this community is just appreciation. I really appreciate the support and getting the opportunity essentially to go off and do crazy things with electrons, wrap them up into a package, and then make those available for folks. I really appreciate the opportunity to do that, and the overall support. I come from Chicago, which is I would imagine still has a lot of corruption and a lot of mistrust. Your first interaction with people is not a trusting interaction, and it's taken a lot of years to get that out of me being here in the Pacific Northwest. But I've really found that in this particular community, in the Eurorack community, that being able to have that with every interaction is just kind of trust and respect is kind of the assumption as you start each interaction. And I just really appreciate that about the community, and just hope that we can continue to kind of breed that culture and that and breed that community.
Absolutely, same. I would certainly say in England that I see maybe a similar atmosphere, that people are instantly maybe so open and supporting of each other, and the seeing people in the chat meeting you, generosity and kind of open arms with Clarissa when I was over there, everyone at Velocity, it's just so evident. It was before I went to Seattle, but clearly that's part of it as well, just how amazing this community is. It's fantastic. I'm really fortunate to be able to work in it, and family are consistently kind of blown away by it. Really, that you managed to get to do this and support a family, and people are supportive, and everybody wants everyone else to see everybody do well. Like I said, the shop owners are all largely very good. They're part of this community. It's not this big horrible kind of business corporation giant thing kind of feeding off the scene.
Yeah.
It's all part of it, and they're very interesting, engaged musicians themselves. It's such a lovely thing. We did have the final kind of few questions coming in. Really, truly last call for questions, because we'll wrap up after these ones. What are the panels for Typhoon and Pachinko made of?
So we do all FR4 for our panels at this point, at least. That's to get that black and gold look. So it's PCB material, and it just I felt it's offered the most design capabilities as well as consistency in supply. We did a couple of rounds of aluminum panels and had a lot of supply chain problems with those, and quality problems as well. And so we've actually made the decision thus far to continue to stick with FR4.
Yeah, Bafako, Steady State Fate, many other companies are all FR4 panels, and just a much easier thing to have produced, much more reliable. Not holding you up. I've known panel runs really kind of cripple release plans for other companies, so you just got to go with what works. And they're great, nice strong panels, and as you say, you get the look that you want. Michael Letchford asked, will you be making a micro grids?
Micro grids. So I actually did a run of them because I wanted one. So if you want one, just send us a message, because we have a couple still. I think we have a couple still. Just send us a message. We actually can probably figure out how to get you one.
Lenny asked, what about a drum module?
I really want to do a drum module, Ben. You were going on about clap sounds, and I had done some research into it. It's not on the horizon right now, but you never know. Those inspirations change each day. But at this point, I've not. It's a pretty covered space, but at the same time, without wanting to get into too many details on the plans, it would actually complement some of the future plans really well as well. But it's a whole, as Ben was kind of pointing out, with the 4 short VCAs, it's a totally different game to get into, and it take a whole another engineering round where I would just need to learn a lot, and I'm just not quite there yet.
Yeah, you realise that it's often quite a lot condensed into just a simple doom for drum sound.
Yeah, I looked at it enough to know that it was that, when you, as we all have done, when we looked at the Eurorack pit in front of us and we all jumped in, I looked at the drum synthesis pit in front of me, and I played around a little bit, and I quickly stepped back.
Mark Booth said, really great modules on the site. I'll be ordering some from Signal Sounds. Can't see the Beehive U-Plats though, which looks great. Wish I could get that one here in the UK. Generally, I found getting things from the US to be not too difficult. Things in the US seem to be a little bit tricky, maybe with post at the minute. Maybe you can offer a different experience, but things coming out of the US has been fine to me in the UK. And that's probably going to be the place where you want anything afterlater audio, you're going to be the place that has it all. Stores around the world won't take one of everything, I would imagine.
Yeah, so Beehive is actually brand new. We actually dropped that out probably the day before we released the new modules. We just didn't publicize it because we're trying to focus on the new original designs. So that's why I think you're seeing Signal Sounds hasn't absorbed it yet. They haven't even seen it on our price list yet. So in the next probably the next couple of days here, gauging on the ordering status here, we'll probably be hearing from them and see what we can't work out there.
Chris's sister-in-law lives in the UK, and he's going to get some of that Casa Espresso coffee beans for Christmas.
I did want to talk on the shipping thing for a moment, if I could.
Please do.
Within the US, actually, if you're using the Postal Service, we've had all local delivery is all very local, hyper local, right? All depending on the individual carrier and your individual property and all that. So, barring those exceptions, the actual delivery system is actually working fairly well. What's not working very well that we've experienced so far is postal international. So, in other words, if we were to send through the post office to Royal Mail, that delivery chain can be really bad, and it's particularly bad going into various parts of Europe right now. So that's why we've actually opened up with DHL. So we offer an expedited service now. It's a bit more. It's, I think, $35 total. But using that has been really successful for folks. Folks are getting stuff generally in a week, so it's been good.
How about Magpie design front panels? I mean, I guess you can get them and retrofit other panels, right?
Yeah, you can. But so we just offer Magpie. I mean, the main reason why we offer Magpie is it was somebody willing to deal with all the aluminum manufacturing challenges, which we get to hear about from him as well. Not only do we experience them, we get to hear about them from others. But we offer those for folks that wanted the aluminum panel option. So that's where we offer those, and on a handful of the more popular modules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've just had 2 or 3 "Hey everyone" comments, which are just last minute joins for the stream, which is fine. But we are just about wrapping up. I've done a kind of final call for questions, but for the benefit of the 2 or 3 people that have just joined, any questions, you're welcome to get them in before we go. But we'll hang on for another minute or so. Yeah, the Magpie panels. Yeah, I can imagine there's some headache involved with those.
Yeah, he has an entire process built on top of that. With the texturing that he puts on them, that's the only ones that we stock from him are the black textured ones, because that high gloss can be a bit reflective. But the textured panels we felt was a good balance between that gloss and just overall sheen. So.
Yeah, off topic, but someone said, when are we going to do an endorphins interview? I've got some content with Andreas and Julia from their place in Barcelona last year that I desperately need to catch up with, as well as some of their new modules as well. So coming, a vague coming, as I sit on a massive to-do list of things and try and get caught up. Hello from Malmo, Sweden. Hey Bruno, I'll be saying goodbye any second. I'm just watching the delay in the live chat just for any last bits. And Afterlater Platts was my first module, and still to this day is my favourite module. That's cool to hear, Stephen. Yeah, so just to round out, I'll do a big kind of dump of links while I just leave a thumbnail screen up at the end if people are wanting to catch links to anything we've mentioned. But just one final time for blend, tilt, and steps, which I'll pull the image up. I'm going to do deep dive videos for each of them, individual demos, all around 2 weeks from now. So in 2 weeks I'll do the first one, 2 weeks after I'll do the next, and so on. You're welcome to have input for that for those series of videos. So if there's patches you'd like to see, suggestions, certain questions, fire them at me, whether that's an inbox, whether a comment on this video, a comment on the demo. Do go and fire them at me, and I can try and include them in the video for you. And if the patch doesn't work out, as Chris said earlier, I won't throw it in and blame you for it. I'll cut it from the edit. Beehive looks really cool. Is it possible to break out the low pass gate controls for the decaler?
Yeah, we looked at it. It takes work on both firmware and hardware side. So I put it in the design ideas, but certainly looked at other opportunities of things that we can do with Platt. So hopefully at some point we'll be able to bring that out.
Cool. Okay. For the benefit of those that have missed it, and to buy me 40 seconds to go grab links just before we say bye, here is the first intro from my demo of these 3 new modules for anyone that's missed it. I'll grab links and then we'll sign off at the end. And if there's one final question, I might creep that in. So let's just check out the modules one last time. Hello and welcome to this video on 3 new Afterlater audio modules, Blend, Steps and Tilt. let's check out what's to come before we get into it. Okay, and one final thing that I will pull up, didn't want to crowbar it in until the end. There is DivKid merchandise. Someone asked me, I want a t-shirt, so I figured I better actually start talking about it and share it. It's something that I occasionally share on Instagram, but very bad at sharing it anywhere else. If you're modular curious, I have the t-shirt for you. If you need to read your effing manuals, I have the t-shirt for you. There is DivKid merch. If there's anything on there that you like, and I don't mean this as a overly kind of sales pitch, I'm going to do a bit of a revision of the store. So maybe grab anything that you'd like clothing-wise at the link in the chat. All the links to everything is in there. All the different modules, Afterlators site, their Instagram. Final question, what's the best Eurorack module? This is turning into a Facebook thread. We need to the only way to approach that, if you go by Facebook, is to list every single module you own and argue with people that don't own what you own, that what you own is better, because there's some serious confirmation bias going on when you spend money and buy modules. Yeah, nice one, MP. I'm sure they mean that as a joke. Best Eurorack module. I was going to say a case full of tilts. Function generators are kind of the ultimate, but we won't go there. Do a Heinbach and DivKid shirt collab. We could maybe do some single malt synthesis thing. The Friday night single malt synthesis streams over on the Heinbach channel will return after a bit of a summer break, probably in the next couple of weeks. Looking forward to going back and watching this. Have a great day, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Drew. Thanks, everyone else. Perfect catwalk wear. I'm not sure what kind of catwalk walks you're on, David, but maybe take a picture. The best module is a passive mult, according to Tom Evans. The power switch is best. I've got a DivKid t-shirt for every day of the week. You've got more DivKid t-shirts than me. I maybe need to rectify that. The more expensive, the better. Yeah, exactly. More confirmation bias. Right, great. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Lenny, for joining me. It's been a pleasure to finally get to the interview we did last year and to share that video, to just hang out here and let people connect and check out some new stuff. And watch out for the demos coming soon. And do fire away with any input on those that you'd like or questions for Lenny we can follow up with. Cool. I'm going to leave you with some of my finest thumbnail work, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Bye.